All right, so now we will go over some iterations with respect to the link or a way of linking skepticism, that is, as a theory about the possibility of knowledge, doubt, of course, a core concept used by the skeptic, but also used by the philosopher Rene Descartes. And so we're going to start off with a little recap. I am going to present maybe some new details or ways of looking at Descartes' concerns with the possibility of knowledge. You've already, of course, gotten an introduction and some at-length lessons in your book, but I'm going to highlight and emphasize certain things and add some new information or details. So I will be reading through this, but I will also be adding information that you'll want to take notes on. So make sure you do that, especially where you see the dots there. That means you want to fill in that information. So as you'll recall, the skeptic thinks that all claims to truth can be doubted. The question is, what are we to do with this doubt? Descartes decides that he will use doubt in order to show that genuine knowledge is possible. This might sound counterintuitive, but one way to think about this novel strategy is to think of Descartes as fighting fire with fire. Another way to think about this counterintuitive strategy is that he thinks that he can show that it is possible to doubt one's way to certainty and hence knowledge. So again, remember that for Descartes, there's an intimate connection between certainty and knowledge. If you have a belief about which you cannot be absolutely certain about, you have some reason to doubt it, even if it's just a shred of doubt, that item cannot count as knowledge. You'll remember that this was the approach of the skeptic, and we saw this in the complex argument for skepticism in a previous lecture and some analysis and clarification that you did. I want you to keep in mind and think about your own experiences of doubt. Has there ever been a belief that you have doubted? Have you ever doubted yourself? What was the context of your doubt? What was the psychological effect of your doubt? So at this point, let's recall an excerpt from the Week 8 Learn Smart task. Remember what Lawhead said. Although Descartes did not end up a skeptic, he initially used skeptical doubt as a test to decide which beliefs were absolutely certain. Hence, his strategy for certainty could be called methodological skepticism. Again, so what we want to emphasize here, and that I'll emphasize later, is that he is a skeptic only at the beginning of his project in the Meditations, only as a tool. It's a method en route to going beyond and breaking through skepticism. His method was to bathe every one of his beliefs in an acid bath of doubt to see if any survived. Descartes employed a very rigorous standard here. If he could think of any possibility that a belief of his could be mistaken, no matter how improbable this basis of doubt was, then he would suspend judgment concerning that belief. He realized that most of his beliefs would dissolve when subjected to intense scrutiny. But even if one belief survived skeptical attack, then he could be absolutely certain about that belief. So we're going to return to this iteration when we get into another lecture focused on the first one or two paragraphs in his work called the Meditations. But I just wanted you to see how what I'm saying connects to what you learned about in the reading. So now the question is, how is Descartes' doubting project connected to 17th century history? So again, you might have gotten an introduction to this in the reading, but I want to emphasize certain things. And one thing that I really want to iterate here is that Descartes isn't doubting things just to play devil's advocate. He is trying to reconcile his beliefs about the genuine possibility of knowledge with various aspects of his lived experience in the 17th century. Historically, Descartes' meditations and use of doubt can be seen as a reaction against important skeptical currents in Renaissance thought, the so-called Pyrrhonist crisis. So in your Learn Smart reading, after you got the generic argument for skepticism, you were introduced to Pyrrho of Elis, an ancient philosopher who was a well-known skeptic at the time. And you were given his reasoning as to why Pyrrho thought that genuine knowledge is not possible. And in that argument, or the reasoning that was presented on behalf of Pyrrho by Lawhead, we saw Pyrrho giving reasons to believe that experience or the senses could not give us any knowledge, and that reason as shown through the ability to show opposing arguments with opposing conclusions about the same topic, could not give us any knowledge. So there is a resurgence in the 17th century of this ancient philosophy. So this ancient philosophy is BC, so that means before Christ. So we are talking, you want to think, when you think of ancient philosophy, you want to think like 400 BC, 300 BC. So it's hundreds of years later, about 2,000 years later, there's a resurgence in this kind of skepticism, and it's affecting people's thought and beliefs and trust in sources of belief. So continuing on with this quoted material, in the face of the rapidly expanding boundaries of the European world in the 16th century, from new texts to new scientific discoveries to the discovery of new worlds, contradictions and tensions in the intellectual world abounded, making it more and more attractive to hold with the classical skeptics, including Pyrrho Velis and Pyrrhonian skepticism, or Pyrrhonian skepticism, I should say, that real knowledge is simply beyond the ability of humans to acquire. Against this, Descartes asserted that real certain knowledge is possible. So though his name is associated with skepticism, and in particular methodological skepticism, what I want you to note here is that, and to really make sure you understand, because some people miss this, is that it is as an opponent and not as an advocate. So again, though Descartes' name is associated with skepticism, and though Descartes uses skepticism as a tool to reclaim knowledge from the fires of skepticism, is that it is as an opponent and not as an advocate. So one way to think about it is that he's seeing, how there are certain questions that are being raised about what people thought they knew. Science and new discoveries is calling long established held beliefs into question, right? And so now there's contradictory beliefs that are coming to the surface, and now one is wondering, well, is genuine knowledge even possible? There's all these contradictory beliefs. This is interesting to think about with COVID-19 and the pandemic. Are there not a lot of opposing and contradictory beliefs out there as a whole? Whether it's President Trump contradicting Dr. Fauci, or the governor of Texas, contradicting the health claims of, the health specialist for Dallas County. Aren't there contradictory claims about, whether masks really help slow the spread of COVID-19? So the idea here is that there's a lot of opposing beliefs that people once held to be true are now turning out to be false or questionable because of new beliefs that are emerging through really science and new discoveries. So what does Descartes' doubting project have to do with the science? So when I'm thinking about Descartes' doubting project, of course, I'm thinking about what you learned about in the Learn Smart reading. We're going to be focusing, just as you did just as Lawhead did in the Learn Smart reading, some original text of Descartes. As you know, I don't have you read or tell you to read or require that you read any original text excerpts in the Learn Smart readings. I tell you that if we're going to be concerned with that we'll do it during lecture time. Okay, that said, during his lifetime, Descartes was just as famous as an original physicist. Sorry, let me reread. During his lifetime, Descartes was just as famous as an original physicist, physiologist, and mathematician. In fact, he was all of these things. He attempted to restart philosophy itself in a fresh direction. He refused to accept the philosophical traditions that had dominated philosophical thought through the medieval period. He attempted to fully integrate philosophy, and here's some more missing information, with the new sciences. Okay, so it's really interesting to think about that, and we're going to see that in some original text that we look at. But I also want you to be thinking about, again, COVID-19, what science has had to say about COVID-19, how people have received that knowledge about COVID-19, all the contradictory claims. Given all the contradictory claims about COVID-19 and how even scientists and others changed their beliefs about some aspect of COVID-19, can any of the beliefs that we ever entertain ever count as knowledge, including those from science? Is science being undermined? Should we be concerned? Is there a way to save science from doubt with respect to it being a reliable and trustworthy source of knowledge? Okay, so in the Meditations, Descartes is particularly interested in trying to save science from the fires of skepticism. He is also trying to keep it alive as a safe field of study at a time when the church is threatening people for making scientific claims that contradict the church's metaphysical and epistemological doctrines. And of course, by now you should know what I mean by metaphysical and epistemological doctrines. Oh, let me get rid of that. It's an accident. And let me redo this page just a little bit. I need to show you something that you do not yet see. Maybe just few more seconds. Okay, very good. All right, so let's get toward the end here. I cannot emphasize this part enough. While Descartes was a scientist, in addition to being a philosopher and mathematician, among other things, you must remember, and I would circle this, he thinks that the truths of science are and I accidentally cut off this word, I actually meant to omit it, but you want to fill in the rest of the sentence, that the truths of science are justified ultimately by reason. All of those words are important. So again, the truths of science are justified ultimately by reason. In other words, science may reveal many things to us through experience, and of course, and so by experience, the senses, and observation. But it is reason that is the ultimate epistemological judge in what counts as justified true belief. And actually, I meant to say that just a little bit differently. So again, it's but it's reason that's the ultimate epistemological judge in the court of what counts as justified true belief. So, big takeaways. Descartes uses skepticism as a method for showing that genuine knowledge is possible. So don't tell me or come away with thinking that Descartes is a skeptic. He's not. Because he thinks that reason is the ultimate epistemological judge in what counts as justified true belief and hence knowledge, because he thinks it is reason that is the ultimate source and route to knowledge, he's obviously a rationalist. He's using skepticism only as a tool. Interestingly enough, another thing that students get confused about that I want you to make sure you take away is that while he wants to save science, which would seem to be the domain of the empiricist, from skepticism, he is a rationalist. Why? Again, because ultimately, reason's going to decide what any information or beliefs you appear to be getting from observation, from experience via the senses, is going to count as justified true belief. So now, when it comes to your I want you to do with this lecture, I will give you some prompts to respond to. So just go back to the Blackboard created review. That's it.